morning everyone. We are back with our December 2nd week current affairs. I will be dealing with 6 topics today. So let us go on to the first topic, that is the bail system in India. So recently it has been in our UPSC prelims exam as well as it has been in news very recently. So what is the meaning of bail? Bail. What do you understand by the term bail? See, simply saying that it is like some kind of conditional release or provisionally we are releasing certain person who is already in certain custody or police custody or might be in judicial custody or anything. That is what is the term bail corresponds to. If you really want to define it, it is a conditional or provisional release of a person who is in a legal custody. You getting my point? If you use the term legal custody, it includes both judicial custody, police custody and arrest, all these things, right? So there are 4 types of bails available. First one is regular bail. It is normal bail when which the court gives to a person who is in a police custody, who is arrested and he is in a police custody. Remember, he is arrested and he is in police custody. It is when the court gives the order or gives this regular bail for a person. Okay, and it is covered in section 437 and 439 of CRPC. Remember this. Okay. Section 437 and 439 will talk about this regular bail. And second type of bail is anticipatory bail. What is this anticipatory bail? The term itself talks like that, no? Anticipatory. In the sense that it is given by the court to a person who is not yet arrested, who is going to be arrested. So this person is already in police custody, then when the bail is given, it is called as regular bail. When it is anticipatory bail, he is not yet arrested. And bail is sought for them. Right? It is covered in the section 438 of CRPC. Okay? And this anticipatory bail is having a special provision in the sense that it is given only by a session court or a high court. Only by session court or high court. Okay? This is what is anticipatory bail. Covering these 2 aspects, there is one more thing which is interim bail. What is this interim bail? No. Serious allegations, these are all there, no? Serious allegations, everything will be serious if once you are in jail, it will look serious only for you. Okay? So interim bail, when these bail petitions are in the court will give interim bail until this decision is taken with regarding regular bail and anticipatory bail. You getting my point now? Until the court decides on the proceedings regarding or issue regarding this regular bail or anticipatory bail, the court can give interim bail to the person, right? And there is one more bail, it is called as default bail. Or it is also called as statutory bail. And it is indisputable bail. That means it is a right given to a person. For example, we'll discuss about this particular bail because it is very, this bail system is corresponding related to article 20 and 22. What is article 20 of our constitution says? It provides protection to the person who is arrested, right? Simply. And article 22 says provides the safeguards and protections for the preventive as well as punitive detentions that takes place, right? So in order to protect the rights of these individuals, these bails will come in every time. So when the person is arrested, what will happen? First, he will be in the police custody within next 24 hours or so. After 24 hours, he will be taken to the magistrate and the magistrate will decide. There the bail things will all come into the picture, right? So within 24 hours that will be done. After that, so police will come to the court and say that we need time to deal with some kind of investigation, we need time, and so please place him in the judicial custody without granting any kind of bail, because giving him bail, making that person out of the jail will create some kind of disturbance in the investigation process. That is why they'll seek that judicial custody and then they'll continue with the investigation. Normally the court will give 60 to 90 days for completing the investigation, okay, depending upon the case. For example, it might take even more than 90 days. For example, in the case of Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, the court can extend certain timeline for police to complete their investigation. So even if after this investigation process is completed, if the police are unable to prove anything, then this default bail and statutory bail will be coming into the picture. So as a matter of right, the court will have to provide this default bail or statutory bail to the person because police has unable to provide certain proofs against the person who is arrested. He has not completed the investigation process, but as a matter of right, it has to be given. So he will be coming out. Court will give this default bail or the statutory bail, and it is covered in section 167 subclause 2 of CRPC. So remembering them is not important, but when you write some kind of answer or anything, I hope this will be a value addition in your answers. That is why I am telling you. So these are the 4 types of bail systems. Let us see with regard to the articles 20 and 22. What did it tell you? Protection or safeguard for the person being arrested or arrested. So he enjoys what kind of rights under Article 20? No ex post facto legislation, in the sense that the person cannot be booked under a particular case where the law has been enacted after he has been arrested. There is no retrospective effect. That means the law should already be there, only then he will be charged under that particular law, and after he is charged you cannot make a law and say that this will be applicable to him, okay, and it is valid only for the criminal laws. No ex post facto criminal legislation, actually more crisply, right? Civil legislations can take place irrespective of whatever will happen, okay. Second, no double jeopardy. What does this mean? Person cannot be charged or arrested twice for the same crime or same mistake he has done, right? So, for example, I killed someone and I have been booked, but at the same time, the company where I am working has actually removed me, has retrenched me from the employment. So it is like punishment for me, but in the court only the killing will be considered, only criminal case will be considered. The punishment which you are facing because of loss of employment is not like a punishment that the court will be considering. Though it looks like a double jeopardy, but it becomes a civil case there. You getting my point, no? See, there is a confusion. Criminal case cannot be booked twice. If there is something like a criminal charge and there is civil punishment that he is facing, it is not considered as a double jeopardy. That is what I am trying to say. You getting my point, no? Here he has done some criminal act, some criminal punishment is being given to him, but some kind of civil punishment like losing of job or even government job, something like that, which deals with the civil cases, that will not be considered under this double jeopardy. That is one of the exception there. So third one, same, if you have killed once, only once you will be receiving punishment for that particular case, not twice, no. What will happen is, if somewhere in the border of the state, the crime has happened, and the case went both to the High Court of Karnataka as well as High Court of Telangana. No, cases are booked in both the, went into both the courts. Both courts cannot give the judgment here. He will not be receiving two punishments for the same crime. Only one court will be taking the charge of dealing with that particular crime and all. You getting my point? Simple logic I am telling you. So next, telling you guys, I forgot what is the next point. Anyway, see, no ex post facto legislation, no double jeopardy. Okay, he cannot be witness against himself. Cannot be against himself, right? It gives the responsibility, it gives the power to the police personnel or the law and order administration to prove that person as guilty. Okay, but he cannot be forced to witness against himself, which is completely wrong. Okay, they have to produce some other witness in the court and prove it, or prove by forensic methods, prove that he has done certain crime or not. Okay, and fourthly, he should be consulted, he should be allowed to be consulted and be defended by an advocate. These are the four areas that this Article 20 talks about. Okay, and then there is Article 22, which talks about safeguards and protection for two cases, that is, preventive detention and punitive detention. So the safeguards regarding punitive detention will come in after the person has arrested and court has convicted him. Okay, only then this punitive detention safeguards will be kicked in. And this preventive detention, when the person has been arrested even before the crime has been committed. It is done for the security of the country. Anyway, punitive detention, what are the rights here? He should be informed about the charges. He should be informed, right to be informed. Okay, same thing, he should be consulted plus defended by an advocate, he should be brought to the magistrate, nearest magistrate by within 24 hours. Okay, and he has the right to be released if the magistrate decides so. The magistrate considers that he should be released, he should be released. He has that right. After this 24 hours, he will be going into the judicial custody and all. No? Whether he should be released or not, it is the work of the magistrate that the police will take. So that article? Okay. Yeah, there is a conflict there, but there are safeguards for provided. It is not that completely. That is what because you can consider that default bail. It is considered under the article of right to life only, Article 21. Because preventive detention, there are certain safeguards based on which you can balance that Article 21, which you call as right to life. See, preventive detention, the person should be detained maximum for 3 months. Thereafter, based on the advisory board's decision, he will be continued to be detained. Okay? And 42nd Constitution Amendment Act tried to change this 3 months to 2 months, but it has not been into implementation phase. Still the 3 months is still continuing. Okay? Second, the person has right to be informed of why he is detained here. Like this one. Right to be informed. He has that right. But however, certain facts which would threaten the national security or national sovereignty, those facts need not be informed to him. Otherwise, there is no point of preventive detention. Yeah, we are going to have that discussion today. AFSPA will deal. Yeah. Yes, that is what. That is exception for this act. It is violating of this Article 22 or which one? Bhima Koregaon case. Yeah.
In that case, only partnership
Yeah, same thing. They were detained in their. Same thing is happening in Jammu Kashmir, no? After removal of Article 370, several political leaders were detained or house arrested. So, and they were filing the case by using Article 32 of the Constitution, saying that they are violating these articles, these fundamental rights that we are enjoying. You're getting my point, no? That is what you need to understand. How you will defend the fundamental rights of a particular person. Bhima Koregaon case is based on a certain kind of violence where there is something called Mahad group, right? And they were celebrating, I think Ambedkar's birthday or something. There is some kind of festival that they are celebrating, and there were caste conflicts that arose during that celebration, and that is what Bhima Koregaon case violence. And Bhima Koregaon, it depends upon. I should understand. This is the victory of Mahads over the upper caste, that when Mahads supported what you call these Britishers during I think Maratha War, third Maratha War. So that is what they were celebrating it. They are celebrating that event, but the Marathas or the higher caste who were living there, probably they did not like that kind of celebration, because it is, they are saying that it is highlighting British victory. So in that name there are certain clashes, and because that clashes arise, several leaders as well as several activists as well as several intellectual thinkers have been arrested or detained by the central government. That is the controversy there. Okay. Anyway, right to be informed, as the certain facts, if they are sensitive, they can be withheld before informing. And there is third thing, and he has, I think, yeah, he has the opportunity to defend himself. That is the third thing. Okay, and only difference is this punitive detention provisions are provided only for the citizens. They are not provided for the enemy aliens. Okay, even foreigners will have that right, but enemy aliens will not be enjoying these rights. But enemy aliens will also be enjoying these punitive detention safeguards in the constitution. You are getting my point, no? That is a small difference. We never know when UPSC will pick this point. That is why we need to be very careful, very thorough with each and every point with regard to these articles. Okay, let us go on to the next topic. So, dam safety bill, there are several parliamentary sessions are going on, there are several bills, but if I bring all the bills in same class, it will become little boring. That is why I will try to bring as many bills as possible, so that each week we'll discuss certainly regarding these bills. Okay, this bill has been passed by parliament, only then I am bringing them. Otherwise, there is no need of discussing. We know that surely that it is going to become an act now. It just requires president assent. Then we will be discussing those things. Okay. So, as I said, bills, I prefer you guys follow this hexagon model every time. Okay. So, what is the purpose of the bill first? What is the need for the bill? Yeah, many of the dams are getting older and older, and what is the requirement there then? No, the dam safety itself. Since they are old, we need what is called as surveillance, proper maintenance, proper vigilance, proper operating mechanisms, yes, and then monitoring. All these aspects. And who will be doing this? There is no law or there are no standards that are specified in our country. Okay. Yeah. Water is something like a state subject, and interstate water is something like a union list, is in the union list, right? This kind of mismatch or some kind of proper standardization of certain rules and regulations is required, so that every dam is equally protected, equally treated. Right. So, in such way, there are several institutional measures that are bringing up. So, bill mostly talks about these institutions only. First is National Committee on Dam Safety. Remember, National Committee on Dam Safety. He will be chaired by the chairperson of Central Water Commission. Right, chairperson of Central Water Commission will be the chairperson of this committee, National Committee on Dam Safety. So, what is the purpose of this committee? It will formulate policies. It is formulation. Okay, it will design what we called as the dam safety standards. Okay, there is one more institution at implementation level in the national scale, that is National Dam Safety Authority. It is at the implementation level. It is trying to implement the policies and the standards across the country. So, it is also having the power of accrediting the agencies which are involved in the construction, maintenance of these dams. Accreditation, it will provide some kind of ranking, some grading of these agencies will be done, so that it will instill competition and also ensure that dam safety will happen. Okay, accreditation, it will bring out some kind of professionalism in these agencies. That is one of the positive points of this particular bill. Okay, that we need to discuss later. Okay, and there is state level organization, State Dam Safety Organization. So, it is more closer, it works under the National Dam Safety Authority. Okay, it is more close that it is going to ensure that there is surveillance of these dams, and it will also collect data regarding these dams. Okay, okay, Gayatri, I'll repeat it after the end of the class, okay? So, you're getting my point, no? Where am I? Yeah, State Dam Safety Authority, it is going to ensure the surveillance. It will go and have a direct surveillance on the dams that are in its jurisdiction. And at the same time, it is going to collect all the data required, all the dam safety standards, whether what to say, if there are any cracks or anything on these dams, how they are properly maintained, how many members are maintaining it, all the data, what is the water flow in that dam, what is the water holding capacity of that particular dam, all these things, it will collect all this data, okay? And it bill also talks about responsibilities of dam owners. Okay, responsibilities of dam owners in the sense that they need to ensure that dams are cleaned before and after the monsoon, or dams are they are monitored. They should be monitored very closely after an earthquake or some kind of flood situations, whether they are having some kind of cracks there or anything like that, leakages are there. So they are giving the responsibility to the dam owners itself, and they also need to prepare some kind of action plan. That means they need to streamline the process of how they will act in situations of disaster or anything. So that action plan has to be prepared by them, right? These are the responsibilities, some of the responsibilities that were given to the dam owners. But however, lastly, some penal provisions are also there. Either they might be some kind of fine or arrest or both, not dealing with, but mainly two cases they'll be having a penal, they'll be employing penal provisions on the people, in the sense that if the dam owners or someone is obstructing these authorities in performing their duties, they'll have that penal provisions applied on them, okay, for obstructing. The administration or the public personnel, whoever is coming there and taking data and all, surveilling all these things. Okay, if they are obstructing them, they will be attracting these penal provisions. Okay, or else if they are not handling their responsibilities properly, when it is known that they are not handling these responsibilities properly, then they will be having these penal provisions applied. Right? So now tell me, what are the pros and cons of this particular bill, citing all these provisions? First thing is standardization, uniform standards across the country. It creates no confusion to none of the administration, and it also doesn't create any kind of confusion even to the courts when they decide upon a case. So that is very much required, right? So there won't be jurisdiction confusions, won't be there. Every state will need to follow this same standards, which is very good. And then this accreditation, which I am telling you, second accreditation, which I told you, it will instill some kind of professional efficiency among the agencies who are involved in the construction, maintenance of these dams, right? Professionalism. Of course, it has 3-tier structure, which is very decentralized way, but somewhere whether it will work in a top-down approach or bottom-up approach is a slight confusion, because the standards and formulations, if first they are being created and then they are being implemented, means that is somewhere problem there. First we need to work upon collecting all the data, and then if we build the standards, having that bottom-up approach will be, I think, will be fruitful. Probably they might be amending the standards gradually, but beginning has to be taken. So the process now has begun as a top-down approach, but it should change into bottom-up approach. You're getting my point, no? That is a small problem there. What else? So having these proper standards will also ensure proper water management in the country. So there is something called as eco-sensitive flow of, or eco flow of the rivers. So the flow of the rivers is decided. Okay, particular river should have certain kind of flow for its natural replenishment. Yamuna river, because of poor flow, we are seeing that huge pollution there, right? So that kind of regulations can be handled by having these uniform standards. And then states like Karnataka and Tamil Nadu are fighting over distribution of water of Kaveri river. They are having because Karnataka is blocking the flow of water into Tamil Nadu. They are complaining all these things. Such kind of things can be closely monitored by having these robust standards that we are having. Okay, we should decide the ecological flow of rivers and then move ahead. Probably that should be mentioned in the dam safety standards. Okay, otherwise it will be harming the dam itself. What else? At the international level, we called for coalition for disaster resilient infrastructure, or I think in the year 2018 or 2019, we have called this coalition for disaster resilient infrastructure. So in order to have the disaster resilient dams in our country, we need to have the standards built. Otherwise, that at international level, it shows that India is playing its part. Getting my point, no? International Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. No, one more point. Positive, think positive points anywhere. Yeah, mostly positive points. We'll go to the negative points or concerns later. What else can you think of? That is again problem. I think. Yeah, watershed management, that is what? All these things, water management, watershed management, you can club all these things in one point. We are having these INDC targets. What is the target for hydrological power generation, hydroelectric power generation? The dam safety is very much important for that, no? You're getting my point, no? The states like Uttarakhand are suffering of poor dam construction there because of sensitive zones present in the Himalayan region and all. If we do not have proper dam safety standards that we are having, so proper structure, building of that proper structure cannot take place. For example, take the small case of road construction that is happening in our country or in some places where there will be contractors, outside contractors will be taking this job of making these roads. So what will happen is they'll have certain raw material people who will supply the raw materials. They'll be sending good quality of these raw materials. Without applying these raw materials on the road construction, what they'll do is they'll sell it in the parallelly somewhere, and they'll buy cheaper raw materials and then lay these roads. That is why our roads will get spoiled even with simple rain. 2 hours rain, it will over. So you're getting my point. That is the kind dam. It might happen, small change in the dam or sand that we use in the making of cement or not. If that is changed, that's it. The safety of dam. So the raw material standards are very much important. That is where the disaster resilient infrastructure or even for this hydroelectric power generation, which is very much required. We have to have that robust or very strong dams.
Responsible dam owner.
Mm-hmm.
Who's the persons of responsible dam owner? Persons. You have said responsible dam owner.
Responsibilities of dam owners, I told.
State is the owner of the dam.
Yeah, if state is the owner, state should take care of it, no? There are several of these dams. No, there are certain dams. There are several infrastructure companies, no, who will be constructing these dams and owning them and operating them. Yeah. See, state will not do every work. It will outsource this work of maintaining, giving this ownership or all these things to outside agencies. So, who is constructing this Polavaram dam then? Some agency is constructing. No, they will have certain responsibilities. And these will be accredited. Okay, once they have done this particular job, they will be rated. They will be given, okay, A grade, their 5-point ratings will be given. This kind of accreditation process will be taking place. So that in future, we know that these are the competitive players and well responsible players in the country. Otherwise, as I told you, as a contractor, road contractor, there will be many people who will be outsourcing this work. You're getting me?
Any dam that is
I don't particularly remember. I think Chroma Construction is involved in one private company itself, but is from Hyderabad. Chroma Constructions, I think so. I don't remember this name. Its office in Jubilee Hills only. So it has won the project, some section of the project in Polavaram project or something like that. Something like that. So all the work will not be done by the government itself.
Exclusively other than the fossil fuels or solar energy, wind and other energy, hydro energy is exclusive from other state. I mean, completely in India there is no private entity. Is it right? Or hydro?
No, we cannot completely say that. Who is constructing hydropower projects then under government? Which organization is working then?
Construction, that but maintenance are working running.
No, they'll be outsourcing them. Most of them will be outsourced. Okay. Okay, what are the criticisms, what are the concerns that you can think of? The state, federalism itself. As I told you, water will come in the state list and the interstate water will be coming in the union list. Okay. So states feel that their authority or their powers are being taken away. But they should also understand that it is for their own good only. That is what we can say or conclude. Okay. What else? Probably. But it will again create more institutional thing. There should be some kind of organization like this committee itself should be dealing with such kind of conflicts if certainly if it arises. Otherwise, having more institutions will not solve the problem. But also, please remember that one. So ultimately, they'll use this one Article 132 or so what 136, I think so, special leave petition, and they'll reach the Supreme Court. Whatever will happen, right? So having tribunal also, problem will not be solved. Because there is mostly political in nature, these disputes. Okay, but we'll restrict ourselves to only the dam safety standards that we are having, rather than worrying about water sharing and all. That is completely different issue. The concern is the states feel that their authority is being taken away through this bill, and secondly, due to the construction of these dams, Narmada Dam, what has it caused? Narmada Bachao Andolan has taken place, where lot of areas have been submerged and the people have been displaced, right? But none of the provisions are talking about how you are going to rehabilitate these people. Okay, there is a Land Acquisition Act which is dealing with these kind of things, but it has to be connected with that Land Acquisition Act at least. There is a gap here. Okay, which is very much required. If the dam safety standards have been failed and the ultimate conflicts are the loss of the people or submergence of these ecological sensitive areas, who should be held responsible? That should be mentioned, no? You get my point, no? So one more confusion is with the Central Water Commission. As I told you, the chairman. The Central Water Commission is the one which is one of the organizations which is going to scrutinize before a dam or something is being constructed. It's going to be scrutinized by Central Water Commission. That means the Central Water Commission has to approve. And this same Central Water Commission, after approving, it is the chairman is from this commission only, no? And this committee is going to scrutinize these dams again. There is some kind of conflict of interest here, no? You are getting my point. The same person is approving and the same person is scrutinizing his own approval. He won't be trying to judge himself and try to prove that he has done mistake or something. Any person at that particular scale, at that level, right? So there is some kind of conflict of interest here that we need to take care of in this particular bill. Okay, let us.
We have Krishna Water Management Board.
Okay.
In which category will come under this provision, sir? Either NDSC or NCDSC?
No, they'll be given under these provisions. No, we'll deal with these provisions. Krishna Water Board has the power, is one of the agencies which is having that maintenance work They have to release this water particular point of time. They have to maintain it. They have to clean it whenever there is a monsoon or after the monsoon. Okay, those are what you call as they are responsibilities of these owners or agencies. You're getting my point, no? Along these rivers, there will be several dams from where, and each dam will be having different owner again. Overall, they will be looking this Kerala or the Krishna Water Board or anything. They will be collecting all this data. Mostly these boards are working for collecting data only. They are unable to resolve the disputes between any state, though the boards are being established. Okay, let us move on to the next topic. We should be quick, okay? Food fortification. We'll quick. What is food fortification? We'll discuss the doubts after the class if possible. Okay. Can I say that it is enhancing some kind of nutrition in the food? Enhancing means the nutrition is already present in that particular food. There are two ways of fortifying food. Either by enhancing particular nutrient or adding the particular nutrient. You are getting my point, you are understanding the difference, no? Food fortification has two concepts here. Either by enhancing the particular kind of nutrient in the crop or food, or by adding nutrients, by using the genetic engineering technology or something. Okay? So, tell me, why do we need this food fortification? What is the importance of this food fortification? Recently, there is a data, National Family Health Survey data. That is how you need to put your arguments. The data has given two things. Of course, we have improved in areas of stunting or something like that, but anemia has been increasing in every section of population, even men, women, and even in children. Okay, National Family Health Survey data. Since the fifth report is belonging to this year 2019-20, and National Family Health Survey data 4 is collected in 2015 and 16. Okay. So anemia, we have witnessed there is an increase in anemia, and then overweight. Percentage of population has also increased. Both these correspond to what is called as malnutrition. Either it is undernutrition or overnutrition, it is malnutrition. Okay. So food fortification can help in reducing them. So iron, increasing iron content in the rice will help in resolving anemia. Iron folic tablets are being given to girl child, no? In order to control the problem of anemia in them. Same thing. Same thing, overweight. Some kind of balanced diet can be built with this food fortification. What else are the significance? So food is very some kind of habitual thing for a person. If you bring an old woman and say that eat this burger and all, she won't be preferring it. You get my point, no? It is kind of habit, and it is some kind of behavioral in nature, the food habits. We cannot easily change them. But by bypassing these behavioral habits, we can provide nutrition to these people. So it will overcome the socio-cultural barriers and provide the the balanced diet to all sections of the population. Right? It is going to overcome the socio-cultural barriers. So we need not take some kind of behavioral change measures. Okay, you need to adapt to this kind of food consumption, not this or something. Getting my point, no? Third, it is more easier to provide that balanced diet in a wider section of population. We are already having the PDS system that is in place, midday meals are there. So we are already providing the food to the wider section of population. So in order to address the malnutrition or hidden hunger that we are seeing, food fortification is one of the easiest and quick way to implement them. So after Corona, the World Bank has given a report due to this 2020 Corona and pandemic and all. India is witnessing what is a reversal in poverty, progression of poverty reduction. So there is an India witnessed increase in poverty during this particular year. So India worked and improved its poverty reduction from poverty reduction line since 2016, and it has went to that level. It seems poverty level has went to the 2016 level. The progress of that we have done in the past 5 to 8 years is nothing in that sense. Get my point, no? So in order to address that thing also, to fight hunger, SDG goal, which goal? 7. Hunger is 2. No, I am telling about, we are talking about hunger only. No? Of course, food poverty is also can be defined in that fashion. Food poverty is nothing but hunger. Right? So it is also very much necessary in order to fulfill our goals of SDG 2. Under 5 mortality rate. Everything. Infant mortality rate. See, nutrition intake takes from the mother itself. Not just the child who has just born or after he is born, nutrition becomes very important. No. From the mother's womb itself, the nutrition is very important for the child. Okay? That is why we have this Janani Suraksha Yojana. We have all, this ICDS scheme was there. We are providing nutrition to this child below 6 years so that they will be reducing in under 5 mortality rate. And we have understood that it is going to help in only in a certain extent only. Ultimately, we should reach the mother itself. Mother should breastfeed them or after the giving birth. She has to give that her own milk for 6 months or 1 year. That is very important, and that is most people are not aware of them during those years, or 5 years back or 10 years back. Now, because of that intervention that we have taken, that mother itself, from the level of mother itself, from the pregnancy period itself, if we take care, probably we will be having better results. And we have seen that results. Okay? But what are the concerns here? Food fortification has some scientific concerns. The sense that health concerns are one of the aspects. Hypervitaminosis is one concern here, in the sense that excessive intake of certain vitamins can take. We do not know how this food fortification will be helpful for the people. No, if a person is already having certainly balanced diet or something, without knowing he is trying to consume this food fortified food or something, so it is going to increase nutrition intake. Excess nutrition intake will take place. So hypervitaminosis or hyper intake of iron or calcium, it is completely wrong in that fashion. It is going to create some kind of healthcare problems, right? And it is said that the natural food intake can be disrupted, in the sense we are having iron rich rice now. We are consuming it. Probably there can be a situation where we will avoid consuming naturally iron rich foods like millets. You are getting my point? And production of these millets will be reducing. And what is use them again? That kind of confusion is also there. Thirdly, food fortification is what kind of process? It is an industry driven process. What will happen to corporations? Corporations are the ones who are going to take up the market and reach the benefits. What about the small and marginal farmers who are cultivating them? You get my point? That kind of problem is also there with the food fortification. Anyway, this is a little boring subject, food fortification. There is no much for us to discuss. Let us move on to the next topic here. Law Commission of India, I think it has been in news. So in the year 2020 itself, government has decided that it will establish this 22nd Law Commission. But till now, government has not taken any action. It has not appointed any chairman or any member or anything. That is where the Supreme Court has come up and said that where is that Law Commission? In 2020, it has passed more than 1 year now. So, coming to the basics of Law Commission, it is an executive body. What does executive body mean? For our understanding, based on prelims, bureaucrats, no. In that sense, what I am trying to say is that UPSC will ask questions in a way that is it a constitutional body or statutory body or anything. In that fashion, you need to remember. It is not a constitutional body or not a statutory body. It is an executive body established by an order of Government of India. Same thing like Niti Aayog, National Development Council, all these things. Okay? So it is not backed by any constitutional provisions or anything. Okay? Who would be the chairman? Huh? Law Minister, no. Prime Minister, no. Either former Supreme Court judge or Chief Justice of High Court. Former Supreme Court judge or Chief Justice of an High Court. Former Chief Justice of an High Court. Who is the chairperson of first Law Commission? When was the first Law Commission established? No, not even. The then Attorney General was the find out his name, okay? Otherwise, everything if I give, you guys won't be working. Okay. So, what is the tenure of a Law Commission once established? 5 years? Okay. 3 years, okay? Remember. Majorly, these are the 3 areas where UPSC can ask, but the history part we need to remember. What is the origin of Law Commission now? Remember this? Charters Act 1833. What are the provisions of the Charters Act 1833? You need to go back and revise again. So, company has ended its trade monopoly, okay, even with China. 2013, the trade monopoly has 1813. The trade monopoly has ended, but trade with China has continued. But 1833, that also has ended. And one of the provisions of the Charter Act is that to establish a commission in order to bring out the provisions related to administration of the country or justice delivery. Okay? It had that provision of establishing a commission, Law Commission. Based on this provision, in 1834, the first Law Commission has been established under Lord Macaulay. Based on his recommendations only, we have this Indian Penal Code or Criminal Procedure Code or anything. Okay? And those things we are still following them. So the background, the origin of Law Commission is here. So after making this constitution, there was an Article 372. Article 372 in our constitution, which says that any law that is pre-existing in the country can be continued as long as it is been amended or repealed by the parliament. You are getting my point, no? In that way only this Law Commission, Macaulay's Law Commissions, all the recommendations which were included in Indian Penal Code or Criminal Procedure Code, we have continued them even now because of this Article 372. Okay? The pre-existing laws can be continued as long as they are repealed or amended by the parliament. But however, there was raising demand that we need to have certain changes, we need to have reforms in the judicial or justice delivery system and all. That is why the first Law Commission has been established in the year 1955. Since then, there were 21 Law Commissions till now that are established, and now government is trying to establish the 22nd Law Commission. And what is the function of Law Commission? What will it do? Of course, it is remember this point also. It is only an advisory body. Okay, government need not implement its recommendations for surely. Well, mandatorily there is government cannot accept, need not accept everything that Law Commission has says. So the Law Commission, it has been very important in the sense that there are several laws which are out of date, and it has kept the track of all these things, and it has tried to bring out, repeal certain act. It will give such kind of recommendations to the central government. There are a lot of outdated acts which we need not require, or otherwise the cases will keep on increasing. So it has recommended in that fashion that we need to repeal all these outdated laws in one, and government has done it. I think in 2016 or something, several laws which are outdated has been repealed by the parliament. In that fashion, it is going to recommend several things of legal reforms to make the legal system more as simple as possible, so that justice delivery will be happening. Okay. Let us move on to the next topic. This is Armed Forces Special Powers Act. So why is it in news again? Because of Nagaland, that civilian killings of civilians that took place. Who are the civilians? They belong to Konyak Naga tribe. Okay. Remember, if they are asked in prelims, we don't know. Konyak Nagas. So we'll discuss the provisions here. So what is the objective of this Armed Forces Special Powers Act? To maintain law and order in the disturbed area. So in that sense, they are giving certain kind of special powers to the armed forces or paramilitary forces, or even the state paramilitary forces and police personnel. Okay, that is the objective, to maintain law and order in the disturbed area. So what is this disturbed area? Section 3 of the Act will say, area is called the disturbed area or dangerous area, which will push us to bring in some kind of armed personnel. It's certainly a vague definition. I'll clearly state that definition. I'm giving you a crux of it. So it is defining areas that are disturbed or dangerous, that the use of armed forces in aid of civil military power is mandatory, becomes mandatory. You are getting my point, no? The situation gets such disturbed or dangerous such that armed forces should be coming to help the civilian power in controlling that law and order. So it is certainly we can draw a criticism there that the definition or the nomenclature has not been clearly defined. So the governor will first apply that we need to implement this particular act, and will notify it, and then the central government will decide on that notification and then send the armed forces here. That is the procedure that is present here. But even the central government can directly take the decision in certain situations if the need be. That is where the criticism comes of federalism again. Yeah. The case with regard to federalism, where it should be state decision to understand the law and order. Law and order is the state subject, the union list, in the state list of Schedule 7, right? So that is where the problem there also. Section 3, it defines the disturbed area and it talks about the procedure of implementing this AFSPA Act. Okay, and then there is Section 4, which talks about the special powers that are given to the army or the paramilitary personnel who are deployed there. What are those special powers? They can shoot any person who has committed a crime or who is suspected to be some kind of criminal or done certain kind of act. Even mere suspicion, they can shoot, which is far reaching. And then they can arrest any person without any warrant, and also take up search and rescue, search operations. Actually there is no rescue here as such, without any warrant again. Getting my point, no? Section 4 talks about all these powers that were given to the armed forces or the paramilitary forces. And then what are the safeguards to this army personnel? what is the provision says? So in order to prosecute any personal, armed personnel for their act done, they requires prior permission of the central government itself, which is never going to happen, which is not happening, right? So that kind of protection is provided to the army personnel while working in this, or dealing with this, working under this act or dealing under this act, okay? And then there is one more thing, there are certain safeguards which are vaguely worded anyway to the civilians or the people living there, in the sense that it is said the shooting, whenever they take this shooting or something, they need to give prior warning once, I am shooting you, they should tell, what is this? Priorly, once they should be warning, it seems. That is the provision that is, what kind of safeguards are these? Or else, it is said that army personnel should work in aid or in coordination with the civilian people who are working there, which is not happening as such. Okay? And then there is one more safeguard which says that if the person is arrested, he should be brought to the police station, nearest police station within 24 hours. That kind of safeguard is also there. So certain safeguards are also provided in this particular law, which is often not read in the media or anything. There are certain safeguards provided. If the person is arrested, he should be brought to the police within 24 hours. If someone knows it at least. Most of them don't know these provisions only. Safeguards that are present to them. Reading my point, no? But anyway, because of this safeguard provided to the personnel, we are unable to implement this safeguards that are civilians are having. You get my point, no? In order to prove this point that he has done something wrong, he has shooted particular person without giving any prior warning. Again, there is a safeguard for them, no? We cannot prosecute them again. There is a anomaly here, there is a confusion here. You get my point, no? Within this act itself. Those are where you need to find out the fault lines that are present in the provisions and bring out your answer. So those are the criticisms, no? So what are the criticisms? Firstly, the confusion in the provisions itself, which I have told you right now, and there are several human right violations which are observed across the country. Okay, there are rapes or false encounters or false information spreading taking place, or even sometimes some personal settlements are also being done. Like there might be some kind of two factions who will be misinforming to the armed personnel that they are taking up some kind of wrong stance or anything. For settling personal scores also they are using this act. So we need to identify those kind of fault lines, and then law and order is okay, but it is tried to ensure that there will be some kind of reduction in militancy in these areas like Jammu Kashmir and northeastern states. But as there has been reduced in this militancy, no. As such, the data says that there is increasing militancy groups in these areas. And the data says Manipur, which had 12 militant bodies or organizations before implementing this particular act in that state, now they are having 201 militant organizations operating in Manipur, it seems. So that is the idea here. So it is being counterproductive rather than being helpful in controlling the militancy, right? So government is also trying to have some kind of peace building process. There are several people who are reaching to this areas. For example, R.N. Ravi. Have you heard of this name, R.N. Ravi? Okay. He is an person on behalf of the government involved in the Naga peace process. The Naga deal, which has taken place in the year 2015, is done by him only. And he has himself said that implementation of this act has not been helping me in controlling or undertaking this peace process more peacefully. He has himself said that. R.N. Ravi is very important person. Okay, these are the value addition for your answers whenever you write. Or else there is person called Home Secretary Pillai. Okay, I think his name is G.K. Pillai. He has also said the same thing. In presence of ASPA Act is becoming difficult to ensure that peace building process take place in these areas. What are the areas this AFSPA Act is being implemented right now? Nagaland is okay. Assam is very good. Nagaland, Assam, JNK or Kashmir Valley. Okay. And then Arunachal Pradesh. Mizoram or Manipur? Confusion lies for me also. That is where you need to be very careful. Okay. Find out that thing. I think it is Mizoram. In Tripura and Manipur, it has been repealed. Okay, it has been taken away recently. I think it is Mizoram only. Check that one. Okay. What else can you think of? Criticism. As I said, one federal issue. Several states they are recommending that we need to implement this act, giving notification, and the central government will be taking. At the same time, when state will tell that please remove this act, implementation of this act, central government should respond. No? So that is also not happened in few cases like Tripura or somewhere. After repeated asking by the state governments or the governor of that particular state, they have taken away the implementation of this act in Tripura and Manipur. Okay, you getting my point, no? So some kind of federal issue is also there in the operation of this act or implementation of this particular act, which need to be resolved. So there are certain committees also which have recommended the repeal of this act, which is very much important for our UPSC point of view. Second, Administrative Reforms Commission, and then Justice Jeevan Committee in 2005 has said that we need to repeal this act, which is determined to the implementation of or enjoying the fundamental rights of our country. Right? So there cannot be some kind of retributive, some kind of harsh measures to bring in some kind of democratic process or implement some kind of integration approach. We need to integrate them and trying to build a national integration in these aspects. Having completely militaristic attitude in bringing or controlling the disturbances are completely wrong, which it needs to be addressed as soon as possible. As I said, one more criticism, as I said, the nomenclature itself, like what do you mean by disturbed area? It is not clearly defined. How will you say that this is a disturbed area? How will you come to the conclusion that this area is a disturbed one? It is not for political reasons or anything that should be considered. It should be purely law and order situation, then you give. Right? So this kind of vagueness in the bill or the act should also be should be addressed, or the bill has to be completely removed. Somewhere the middle ground we need to address. No? Otherwise, till now, why Supreme Court did not try to ensure that this act is null and void and remove this? Supreme Court also found some merit in this implementation act. Somewhere it said that we require some measures like this in order to control the militancy or some kind of violent behavior in these states that is present, to ensure that there is a peacemaking process. So Supreme Court also has some logic behind. Otherwise, it should have repealed right now, no? If it is such a harsh thing. Or else we need to, that is how you need to come in and conclude in your conclusions while you write in conclusion. Cover all these aspects. Getting my point? Different ways of understanding this particular act I am trying to instill in you. Okay? Manipur only? Okay. Repealed in Mizoram and Tripura. Okay. Imphal, yeah, okay. Excluding Imphal, other area is being working. Okay. I think it is final. Manipur. Yeah, it is Manipur. Yes, very good. Only 3 districts, few districts, yeah, parts. So next topic is private members bill. So there is one MP who has said that we need to amend the preamble, saying that equality of opportunity. No, we don't want equality of opportunity, not just equality of opportunity. We want to have equality of opportunity to be born, to get job. He wants to include these terms in the preamble, it seems. So why that kind of exclusivity is what I don't understand. But anyway, the Rajya Sabha has accepted the introduction of this bill. So let us discuss with regard to the private members bill. What is the private member bill? A bill which has been introduced other than a minister. So if a person is from the majority party only, but he is not a minister, can he introduce a private member bill? Right? Yes. Even if it is not, he is not from the opposition party or opposition person, if he is a member of a parliament other than a minister, he can bring out a bill. Right? MP but not minister. Okay? Second, who will draft this bill? By the member itself. So, for example, for a public bill or the government bill, the concerned department will be drafting that bill. But here the responsibility of drafting the bill will be with the member itself. Okay? Drafting responsibility. Third, when will this bill be taken up in a particular week? The particular day has been fixed, that is Friday. Only on Friday this bill can be introduced and taken for the discussions. For the public bill, there is no restriction, any day they can be taken up, right? And for the introduction of this private bill, it requires 1 month notice. For a public bill, it requires only 7 days. 7 days notice is required and it can be introduced in the parliament, either in Rajya Sabha or Lok Sabha. Right? And about all these aspects, there is a committee which is going to work. Committee on Private Members Bill is there. Right? Remember, and collect the data related to the Committee on Private Members Bill by yourself. Like what are the members here? Okay, how many members are there from Lok Sabha? How many members are there from Rajya Sabha? Right? Do that homework for yourself. And there is a cap on number of bills that a particular session should be taking. A session can take up only 3 bills per session for private member bill, but there is no restriction for public bills. Remember this, 3 bills per session. But tell me the significance of private members bill. It represents the stand of opposition. And there are several, the transgender bill has come up in the parliament through the private member only. I think Shashi Tharoor has brought it, and later the government has taken up. So they are going to keep the government on the toe and bring out make the government bring out the legislations which are very much required. No, you are getting my point. No, it is going to motivate the government in that fashion. It is going to question the government. But however, there is certain discrepancy that is happening up in the sense that since 1970, none of the private member bills have been passed. Okay, and the private members, introduction of private members bills, like as a density level, like the introduction, they have gone reducing since 1970, and there are only 14 private members bills till now that have been passed in the parliament. Just 14, which shows that this aspect you can bring in the aspect when you deal with the questioning of democracy or something. So having these more bills passed means we are giving more importance to the democratic process, or giving opposition to play a role in the legislation business of the country, right? So since 1970, how long has it been? 50 years? 50 years we did not pass any private members bill, and all we are, that is how we should understand the democratic decrease that might be happening, whether if we need to judge the decrease in democratic credentials in our country through this aspect, if we need to address it in that fashion. You get my point, no? So I think I covered most of the aspects. I think this part is also not present in your Lakshmikant. I think added this particular part. So if they might ask in UPSC, bring out the difference between 10 mark, they might be asking. Okay, bring out the difference between the private members bill and the public bill. right? And what is the significance of private members bill? And then will the government attract sanction or a censor motion when a private members bill has been not passed or not regarded into consideration? No. So remember that particular difference also here. That is a common logic, everyone will, that is why I did not mention it here. Okay, I think I'll end the session. Okay, there is one person who has asked me with regard to punitive detention. Okay, see, punitive detention will happen when the person has not been arrested yet. Okay, that provision, there's the safeguards in the Article 22 will be coming up before the person has been arrested. Okay, punitive detention, preventive detention will take place before the person has been arrested, he will be detained, but punitive detention will take place after, safeguards will be coming up after the person has arrested and the conviction has taken place in the court. Both these things will happen. Okay, so for punitive detention, there are 4 safeguards which I told you. That means he has the right to be informed, remember, right to be consulted or defended by the advocate, brought to the nearest magistrate within the 24 hours, and right to be released. These are the 4 rights within the Article 22 under the punitive detention. And with regard to preventive detention, what they has 3 safeguards for them. 3 months, you should be detained for 3 months, maximum for 3 months. Otherwise, the advisory board will take the call for the extension of his detention. And secondly, he has the right to be informed, but relevant certain sensitive facts which would be harmful for national security or sovereignty can be withheld. We need not be informed. Okay. Third thing, he has to be given the right to defend himself. He should be given some. He should be given the help of advocate or something so that his detention will be coming out or repealed or removed. Under which article will be applying these for protection of fundamental rights? For Article 32, which I am trying to tell you. Habeas corpus, writ petition. He will apply these things and come out of the detention. You are getting my point, no? Yeah. Okay. Gayatri, I hope you are okay now. Okay, I have covered this topic of punitive detention. Okay. We'll end the session here. We'll meet next week. Thank you.